Alrighty, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started here. We are recording this session for everybody's purposes later after the meeting. We will put it on our YouTube channel, but we'll put it as a unlisted video so that you can share the link to others in your organization that you think might benefit from the information, but it won't be publicly available. And while we go through the presentation, definitely feel free to ask any questions, request any clarifying information. If you need me to explain a point more, do not hesitate to essentially just holler at me. We are definitely welcome every question, and I will answer it to the best of my abilities. But thank you for joining us today for the presentation. Today we're going to talk to you about the SBIR and STTR programs, which are federal funding programs that are essentially a way for the government to invest research and development dollars into small businesses. One of the priorities of the SBIR and STTR programs is actually to focus on investments and kind of growth for what are classified as historically underserved businesses. A lot of times these are women-owned businesses, service-disabled veteran-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, or rural businesses. So thank you. My name is Del Mackey. I am part of the New Mexico FAST program. You're probably going to get a lot of acronyms thrown at you at the very beginning here, but we will be explaining all of the acronyms during the course of the presentation. So for today, we really have three parts to the presentation. We're going to start off with just some background information, which most of you are more than likely very aware of, is really just small business growth, the state of small business in essentially rural America as well as New Mexico itself. Then we're going to talk about the SBIR and STTR programs, how they help small businesses, how they help lead to better economic development, better growth, just really better metrics for things like hiring, tax bases, or for high wages. And we're going to briefly go over what the New Mexico FAST program is, essentially who we are, what we do, and the tools and resources we have available to any businesses that might be interested in looking at these certain federal programs. So to start off with, although it's not really in a dire situation, the state of rural business across America has been decreasing for a number of years. There was a quote here in the 2017 address to the Senate Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee. It was levied that there is a widespread and irreversible shift towards density in the modern economy that presents unique challenges for rural and small town entrepreneurship. Essentially, they were saying that a lot of business was moving away from rural areas and then congregating back into the metropolitan areas. And this presented a large shift from the way that a lot of the business had been viewed of the 1950s and 1960s. In the US, small counties comprise 95% of the 1,700 counties that lost population from 2010 to 2014. And then nearly 3/4 of the small counties that lost the population during that time also lost business establishments. So between 2010 to 2014, because that was the last date that was available in this report, both people and businesses were migrating away from rural America and migrating back into the urban centers, the suburbs, those metropolitan areas that had a larger population. There's actually a little handy chart here on the side, which is not the most readable thing in the world, which I apologize for, but it just shows what were the averages for growth rates by county class size from 1992 all the way to 2014. And as you can see, it has slowly gotten smaller and smaller until it's hovering in the negatives now. So in absolute terms, over 355,000 new companies formed in the metropolitan United States in 2014. In non-metropolitan areas, the figure dipped below 50,000 to 49,100. They actually call out the dip of below 50,000 because that is the first time in essentially recorded history that that had happened. It just kind of verifies the fact that when you are looking at the metro and urban areas, a lot of new businesses are opening up. A lot of innovators are coming out, creating their ideas, getting them, moving, getting them out to market, and rural businesses are either stagnating or decreasing. Nationally, as of 2014, annual business establishment open rate in metropolitan areas was 8.3%, and in non-metropolitan areas, it was 6.1%. So that's just an overall percentage. It is not based on size. It is just based on the percentage of businesses that have always existed there or opened up. So again, although it's not the most clarion call, it does show a pattern that whereas metropolitan and urban areas are growing, they're getting new businesses, they're getting new economy being injected into them, the rural areas are starting to lag. And this has kind of created that weird shift that drives a lot of the need that rural businesses have to grow. They have to be able to be established, they have to be able to get support, they have to have those tools and mechanisms they need to actually get their idea out there so that they can hire, they can grow, they can provide a lot of economic incentives for their areas. And one of the great ways that that is actually starting to happen is through entrepreneurship. So there are a lot of definitions out there for entrepreneurship, but the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor has a great one. Essentially, they say entrepreneurship is any attempt to create a new business enterprise or to expand an existing business by an individual, a team of individuals, or an established business. Essentially, that just means entrepreneurship, as they define it, is anything that is a new business venture, a change business venture, or a way that people are trying to grow, a way that people are actually getting out there. They want to be a business person. They want to actually move their idea. They have this great thing. They just need funding. But it's also one of the things that entrepreneurship is being seen as the new in. It's the new crowd that's doing it. It's all the young people just out of college, just out of high school that want to start their business. But that's not really the case. So between 2007 and 2014, the mean age for entrepreneurs at founding of their business was 41.9. Essentially 42 years old was the mean age for entrepreneurial founders. But that's for companies that go on to hire at least one employee. So discounting all those little sole proprietors that never really do anything, that are maybe a Etsy marketplace or something like that. The ones that matter, the ones that are actually going to hire people, the ones that are going to invest dollars into their areas are actually being opened by, let's just call them middle-aged, because I'm almost there. I don't want to call them old people because I'm not going to call myself old. But then even for those high growth new ventures, the mean age was actually 45. So it shows that tract that while it's seen as entrepreneurship as something for the younger crowd, the ones that actually matter for entrepreneurship, the ones that are growing business, the ones that are actually giving back to the community are really the older generations. So in New Mexico itself, almost 80% was the opportunity share of new entrepreneurs. And what that is classified as is the businesses starting to capture opportunity. So businesses that were created because there was an idea, businesses that were created because there was a hole for them to fill, businesses that were created because they had a product that actually answered customer pain points. About 80% of those businesses that started were started for that factor. So that really leads to the conversation about what's the difference between entrepreneurship and innovation. Well, innovation is that building block of being an entrepreneur. It's proposing a product that's new, novel, or unique, something that's not seen out there, something that fills that void that's left in the market that allows them to actually sell, allows them to be a player in the economic development game. But innovation also really helps companies grow. So it challenges their sense of what's possible, and it also leads to other products and feature upgrades. Rather than doing stuff the old hat, rather than just looking at what they have, by always looking at what they're doing and how they're changing, they're able to actually increase their product line depth and breadth. And then again, as we are talking about small businesses here and rural businesses, it's always the great fact that small businesses innovate. So small businesses have that flexibility to change. They have that flexibility to look at new business ventures. They have that flexibility to look at their processes and actually shift. Large businesses acquire. They don't have that flexibility. They're kind of stuck in their ways, but they are able to acquire either ideas or the businesses outright for those innovations that are created by those small businesses. So we gave you a lot of background about entrepreneurship and innovation, and now you're probably asking yourself, well, why do I care? What does that matter for the purposes of this presentation? Well, for the purposes of this presentation, there is a federal program out there called the SBIR program, and SBIR stands for Small Business Innovation Research. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, the SBIR program is a federal program to inject research and development dollars into small businesses. And that is actually a granting and contracting program, depending on the agency, that you don't have to be a nonprofit, you don't have to be an educational institution. It makes the awards directly to the small business so that they can bring those novel ideas to market. The purpose behind the entire program was to increase private sector commercialization of innovations, so to actually push product, to make a product that's out there for commercial sales, and to stimulate technological innovation. So one of the things that people get hung up on a lot when they talk about innovation is, and you'll find this a lot of times when you're talking to even a small business and you start throwing out the term innovation, they go, well, I'm not building something that's technology based. I'm not building, the next big thing that you're going to find in a Star Trek movie. But that's really not innovation, because innovation is just changing the way you're doing stuff, making something new for less resources, less time. That's essentially what innovation is. But one of the clarion calls for this program is to foster and encourage participation by socially and economically disadvantaged persons. The SBA runs or manages the SBIR program, and anyone that's been paying attention to the news over the past year or so saw that SBA actually signed essentially an agreement with USDA to try and inject dollars into rural America and rural businesses. They see that there's a need for that, and this is a really great way to do that. If somebody is working on something that they have a great idea, but they just need to test it out, they know that it's a great product, but they don't know what the next step is. They need that little bit of help to make sure that their technology works, or make sure that their product, make sure that their service works. These are great ways for them to capture that. So real quick overview of the program. Again, it supports R&D and financing of innovative technologies. It's 3.2% of the extramural research budget for all agencies with a budget greater than $100 million per year. So what they mean by that with the extramural is, like when NSF makes an award within NSF itself, that's an intramural. So they're just shifting money between departments to look at research capability, to look at a great research idea, to try and figure something out. However, when they make an award to somebody like New Mexico State University, that's extramural because it's going outside of the agency. So in 2017, there was about $2.8 billion that were set aside just for the SBIR program, just to help small businesses grow, just to inject some R&D dollars into small businesses. And to date, there's been about 160,000 awards granted. Now, one of the things you'll notice with that is its number of awards and not number of small businesses. So businesses can actually get multiple SBIR awards. They can actually move between the different phases of the program. They can look at different agencies. The big thing about this program, it's not a one and done. As long as you're continuing to innovate, as long as you're coming up with new ideas, as long as you're changing for a different market, there could be SBIR funding. When you go to SBIR.gov, which is kind of the clearinghouse for all the awards, you can actually see companies that have gotten 20, 30, even 40 SBIR awards. And with $2.8 billion total on the table, that can be a lot of money for some of these businesses just to kind of start up, just to get going, just to establish themselves. So why would a small business be interested in pursuing SBIR funding? Well, the first is it's the government seed fund program. You'll actually see that repeated a lot out there. NSF kind of coined the term, but the SBA really latched onto that idea because it is a seed fund when you look at the basics of it. It's an investment by the government so that company can grow. Unlike other seed funds, though, the government does not want any sort of stake within that business. So it's risk-free dollars. It's not a loan. They don't have to pay the money back. They don't have to, well, there is reporting on what happened, what the ultimate end of the program was. Did they set out and do everything they wanted to do? But it's not that Uncle Sam is going to come knocking on their door, 6 years down the road and say, hey, I need my $150,000 back. It's almost like a gift. There's no equity taken, so it is non-dilutive funding. The government does not want any portion of the business. They don't want any portion of the idea. You don't have to share data with the government. You don't have to share rights on the intellectual property that's created. Essentially, the government is not using this seed fund as a way to make money off of a small business. Well, not directly. So a lot of people will ask, well, what does the government get out of this? There's got to always be some catch. And there is. So the reason why it's a seed fund is the government's making an investment into the company. But it's not an investment so that they make those dollars back when the person sells their product down the line and 5% of the sales go back to Uncle Sam. It's an investment in the fact that with the government being able to put money into these companies, with them helping them grow, the companies are able to become bigger. They're able to hire more people. They're able to actually sell more product. They're able to sell a lot more different products out there. And those lead to tax base. So the more product sales that happen for a company, the larger the taxes are that go to the government. The more people they hire and the higher wages they pay, the more income tax that goes back into the government. These are things that a business would have to pay for anyways, but the government just uses this as a way to kind of get businesses going so that there is a strong business community across America. There is a strong economic ecosystem that's out there. And that's why it really is a seed fund. But being that it is a seed fund, it's kind of that similar around established process that normal businesses would go when they were seeking any sort of investment. So when a business goes out to a venture capitalist, typically they're going to have to put together a pitch deck. They're going to have to know their product. They're going to have to know their market. They're going to have to know who they'll sell it to. And when they pitch, they have to usually have a copy of a business plan, like 30 pages. For that typical process, if a business approached a venture capitalist and said, I have this great idea, I need $150,000 to see if it works, and I'm not going to give you any part of my business, the venture capitalist is going to call security. They're going to think somebody insane just came to them and started talking. But that's the entire purpose of this government program. Again, the government wants no part of the idea. They want no part of the business, and you don't have to pay back the money. It's just a way to help businesses grow. And one of the things that the SBIR program also does is it provides a priority position for sole source sales to the government. This is actually can be a really huge thing. So when an agency like Department of Defense or NASA wants to buy a product from a small business, they're not allowed to go out there and buy one off the shelf. They have to have an open competition. If they want to replace the screws on the Mars rover, they have to actually hold an open competition for that certain type of screw, the flex of the screw, the material that the screw is made out of. They have to outline all of that and essentially put out a bid and say, give me your information. Can you supply these? This is the number I have to supply. However, if that agency has actually already dealt with a business, has actually already bought products from a business before, they don't have to have that open competition. They can go directly to that business and say, I need 500,000 of these screws and I need them in 6 months. It allows for a small business to actually sell to the government without having to worry about going up against the Lockheeds and Raytheons of the world and somebody that can just totally beat them out on price and spec because they are a large business. If DoD sees that one of the companies you're working with is creating a drone product that fits right into their scope of work, if they've gotten one of these grants, the DoD can go directly to that business and buy 400 of those drones or 400 of those sensor arrays, whatever it is they're interested in buying, without actually opening up a competition for that product. So it can be a very huge thing to help those small businesses grow and to help them get into the procurement process for some of these large federal agencies. So the SBIR program is actually a gated program. The phase one is really that concept development. You have an idea, you need to see if it works, you need to see if it's feasible. There are 12 different agencies that participate in the SBIR program, and the amount of funding, the requirements, and the time period changes between those agencies as to what's there and what they allow. So for a phase one, for that concept development, there's about a 15% success rate of submission, and that's a first-time submission. When people get a rejection and they take that feedback back and they tweak their proposals, some of the agencies have seen that figure jump up to 45 to 50% for success rate. But for the concept development for a phase one, it's anywhere between $100,000 to $225,000 for 6 to 12 months. And this is kind of just looking at the idea, doing some further research. Will this thing work? When somebody just has pen and paper and they have an idea that they've jotted down, but they need to test the feasibility of it, this is where the phase one comes in. You don't have to build a prototype. You don't have to actually do a lot of bench testing. You don't have to buy specialized equipment that costs $1 million just to make sure it's going to work. This is really just that pen and paper. This is the research I've done. This is how it looks. I need to research this further. I need to see, with some low-level bench testing or, some theoretical computational models on whether my approach can actually lead to something. And once you're successful with the phase one, then you can move to a phase two. So with the phase two, it's more money because it is kind of that market-ready prototype development. Awards can be anywhere from $500,000 to $1.5 million over a 24-month period. So for most of the agencies, that's a 2-year period that they give you. And so it's anywhere between $500,000 to $1.5 million. The average award is about $750,000 across the different agencies. But that's taking that theoretical model that you've proven via research that it'll work, and you're creating that prototype. You're making it work. You're actually getting out there and you're fabricating materials. You're talking to the intended customer. You're looking at what they need and how you change that solution. One of the terms I used in there was market-ready prototype. It's actually a pretty big distinction for a lot of people. So with a market-ready prototype, they aren't looking for a prototype held together with baling wire and duct tape at the end of the 2 years. They're really looking for kind of that stamp out process. Because with the SBIR program, they want these investments into the R&D to actually lead to a commercial product. So they want something to be created. They want something that's actually going to sell. And it can either sell to the open market, so it can be sold, on an end cap at Walmart. It can be sold directly to a federal program. It can be sold to a handful of high power hospitals. They don't care what the commercial potential is. It just needs to be able to be commercialized. And then the phase 3 is that commercialization process. So during a phase 1, your business or the people you're working with had an idea, they need to test it. So the phase 1 came back and said, you know what, that'll actually work. That theoretical model works out. That computation shows me that I can do this. Then they get their phase 2 award and they build a prototype. They go, okay, well now I need to make sure that, my computer wasn't having an off day that day. And they build a prototype that works. They can see that this thing functions. It actually meets all the needs. This can be a product. So that phase 3 is them finding that customer, going out there and looking at, now that I have this prototype, how do I get this into people's hands? How do I start selling this? It used to be that there was no direct funding. However, there are some agencies that actually provide direct funding for phase 3, and that's why it's a limited direct funding. But for the most part, that phase 3 is them actually going out there and approaching things like venture capitalists, approaching angel investors, looking at further opportunities from the government on putting money into that idea. So one of the things that you've probably found when working with people is when they approach a venture capitalist, before that VC puts money into the business, they want to make sure that the thing works. They want to make sure that there's a customer out there. They want to know everything about it. Well, and that's why the phase 3 isn't really just dropping the person off, on the corner and telling them, hey, good luck. The phase 3, once they get all the way there, they have all that information. They know who is interested in it. They know the market. They know how it works. They know why it works. They know how unique it is and the value statement it brings. So it's really setting them up at that phase 3 to have all the tools and knowledge they need so that they can actually approach an investor. So they can go into an angel group and say, hey, I had a SBIR phase 1 and phase 2. It's shown this. I need this much money to actually get commercialized. And a lot of times that works because that investor sees the possibilities. All the information is laid out there and they can actually say, okay, I have belief in your idea. You've shown me that the government believes enough in your idea that over this past roughly 3 years, they've given you almost $2 million in funding. And that's huge. It gets them out there. It gets them into the kind of headspace of, I have this idea. Somebody's interested. Somebody's going to invest. I just have to find the right investor now. So we talked a lot about innovation and kind of what it means, but for small businesses, why are they interested in innovation outside of this program? Well, again, innovation doesn't necessarily mean high tech. So the SBIR program, the big portion for that acronym is the I, innovation. So the program is set up all about innovative research. How does a small business come up with an idea that's going to sell? There have been awards by agencies for very, very low tech processes or products. DoD actually made an award through the Defense Health Alliance to develop comic books for PTSD patients. So comic books that showed them what other people were going through, showed them how to deal with their PTSD, showed them what are the steps to actually get better, to get help, to get assistance, really that they're not alone, which for anybody that's suffering from any sort of psychological trauma can be a huge thing. It can be a great thing to kind of break them out of their shell and show them that they're not adrift on an ocean by themselves. But SBIR funding went into that. The company was paid money to develop comic books, which comic books have been around for almost ever. I'm sure that some of the hieroglyphics on Egyptian tombs, once you actually read them, say, hey, this issue of Spider-Man available here. But innovation also comes in all shapes and forms. So it can be a product, can be a service, can be a process, can be a workflow. Because remember, innovation is just doing something different for less resources. So that's actually happened before, where we'll talk with somebody that has an idea and they go, okay, well, I have this very specific idea. I'm going to sell this very specific product to this very specific customer. And then you start talking with them about their idea. You start talking with them and say, well, how are you doing this? How are you getting this together? And they start to backtrace and say, well, I'm doing this, and this is the research I've done, and this is what I've seen. And, I came up with this really great algorithm that, does this machine learning component. And you make them back up and you go, well, what about that algorithm is unique? What about what you're working on for that machine learning is different? Why'd you have to create your own? And then you find out that the process they've used to actually create their product is innovative in and of itself. So there can be funding just for that. When we talk about it here in a little bit, I'll give you a great example of a company that was funded by USDA for a product, and then they were actually funded for their workflow to create that product because it was so unique, because it was so novel. So that also gets back to the fact that, again, a lot of businesses out there, for the SBIR program, it's not just a one and done for them. They don't win one award. They continue to win awards because they keep continuing to think of unique stuff. They keep continuing to look at the way they're doing some things and how they can improve that process. And that just really brings us back to the last point here is, for businesses, they can't miss the forest for the trees. They always have to look at what they're doing and kind of take that outsider view. A lot of them get stuck in that rut where they focus on that very end product and go, I know that this thing is interesting. I know it's unique. I know I can sell it to this person. And they don't think about the whole setup. They don't think about having to get, their supply chain established. They don't think about how they get, product development going. And there's stuff that people do in the heat of the moment just to get a product out there and just start making sales that can be eligible for SBIR funding. You just never know. So when you're talking to people, always talk about how they got towards that innovation, because there can be SBIR funding and there can be federal funding just for that process, just for that workflow that they're totally discounting because to them it's old hat. It's something they came up with because they had to, because nobody else was doing it. Well, that's the basis for innovation. So again, the SBIR program really should lead towards some sort of commercial product. But commercial merit, while it's one of the guiding principles for the program, the government doesn't really define how it has to be commercialized. So it can be that you make one of these and sell them to NASA, and NASA pays $3 million for a new space antenna to go on a probe. Or it could be that they create the newest type of networking configuration and it goes into every single router or every single networking card or every single computer that is sold. And you can buy these on an end cap in Walmart. There's all sorts of different levels for commercialization. The government doesn't care how it's commercialized. It just has to eventually lead to a product. As I mentioned, there's two different types of agencies. One is a contracting agency and one is a granting agency. We'll get a little bit more into the differences for those, but one of the key things to remember is for a contracting agency, they're looking for a very specific solution for a very specific problem. Contracting agencies, these are agencies like Department of Defense and NASA, because when they put out a long endurance flight to Mars, they need to make sure that those astronauts are taken care of. They notice that when they exit Earth's atmosphere, there's this particular degradation in the outside shielding, outside radiation shielding for a capsule. That was just an example pulled out of nowhere, but it is stuff like that. So that agency has a very specific problem they have to solve, because it can be the matter of life or death for the people inside that capsule, or the warfighter, or whoever it is. So that's why contracting agencies buy products, because they have a problem that needs to be solved, because they have something that needs to be addressed. For granting agencies like National Science Foundation, USDA, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Transportation, they don't buy stuff from people. They just want to see it get out there, because they're a lot more research based. They're not providing a service, or they're not doing something. They're doing a lot of research. They're saying, hey, this is what we want to know about crop health, or hey, this is what we want to know about, alternative power generation. Whatever that is, they just wanted to see it get in someone's hands, but they're never going to buy the product. And so that's why with granting agencies, the business has to find that customer. They have to actually be able to go out there and go, okay, well, this is what I'm creating. This is the pain point I'm trying to address. This is that value statement. This is why people are interested. That is one of the great things about any of the contracting agencies, is your customer is already built in. It'll either be that agency, or it'll be another agency within the federal government, 9 times out of 10. But one thing to do note is that increasingly commercialization is becoming a huge focal point for more and more agencies. More and more agencies are a lot more worried about what are the commercial potential, what are the commercial products, how is that business going to turn this into a product? So that's kind of one of the caveats for the program, and one of the things that, particularly when anyone's talking to a business about these programs, they have to make sure that there is the potential for a product. If the person's working on a great idea for research purposes, and just to push the research out there and see what it leads to, these are not the programs for that. Again, these programs are designed so that you get a potential product out there, you get it into the marketplace, and they start selling it. So we covered this really briefly already, but a lot of people like to think that there is no free lunch, and 9 times out of 10 that is true. So the government does have a purpose in this program, but really it's just to build a stronger economy. So the more businesses that succeed, the more tax revenue there is, the more job growth. It leads to a better economy just for the US. It leads to more money in the coffers for the government, and that's all indirectly. That's all that passive growth, because those businesses are growing, because they're selling products, because they're hiring people. So even though at the beginning we talked about the fact that for a lot of areas small businesses are in decline, small businesses still account for 44% of the US economic activity. So 44% of the essentially sales that are going on, or economic growth that are happening across the US, are done by small businesses. That's almost half. That's a huge figure for when you think about like the Lockheeds and Raytheons of the world that employ 100,000 people versus Joe Neighbor down the street that employs 6 people. Joe Neighbor down the street contributes almost as much to Lockheed, on a grand scale. But it shows the fact that it is important to get kind of that development dollar and that passive dollar into the small business so that they can grow. Because if small businesses disappear, it really does cripple the economy. And then this program actually leads to a stronger innovation pipeline. So on average, small businesses produce 16 times more patents per employee than large businesses. So that's actually getting out there, that's making new things, that's making sure that stuff works, that's putting out new ideas that lead to better products in the end, and leads to things that people can license so that they can actually build better products themselves. Small businesses employ almost 40% of America's scientists and engineers. And again, as I stated before, they're just much more flexible and mobile than larger companies. They're able to take risks. They're able to look at what's going on, what's happening, and they can capture opportunity on the fly, unlike a lot of large companies that can't. So that's kind of really that value purpose with these programs is they want to make the investments where it makes sense. Small businesses can hire a lot more people, just overall. They can put a lot more into innovation. They can actually help create better products. They can help move things along the line much better than a large business typically can. Although, large businesses provide better tax incentives and better tax revenues back to the government. Well, most of them, unless they're Dodgers. But it just shows that there is this need to get money into small businesses, particularly rural small businesses. This is a great program to get them going and to get them growing. So as mentioned, there are 12 agencies that participate in this program. Each agency, because they are federal agencies, they have their different research focuses, they have the different things they work on. Like IES is the Institute of Educational Sciences. They focus on education. So if somebody's coming up with the next great STEM idea to put into their local elementary school, IES might be interested in funding it. However, if they're working on a better drill bit to break through topsoil out in the field, IES is not the agency for them. USDA might be. The National Science Foundation might be. So it's just a really great thing to know about what the different agencies work on, what they focus on for their research, what their clarion calls are and their missions are, because that actually leads to who is interested in funding these ideas. How do they need to get into that agency's hands? What needs to be looked at? Because if somebody submits a proposal to USDA that has nothing to do with food science or rural growth, then USDA is probably not going to fund it. So it's a lot of wasted time and energy. It's just a real quick snapshot to show who participates and the level they participate. As you notice, Health and Human Services and Department of Defense put in the most money. They have the biggest budget. And a lot of these smaller agencies have a lot smaller funding, but they make a lot smaller awards. So that's why even though Department of Education only has 7.9 mil, between their phase 1 and phase 2, they award almost as much as National Science Foundation, just because they make less awards. But less people apply to them. There's not a lot of growth and development that goes into educational technology. Oh, I briefly touched on this one, but with the different agencies, there's a lot of common elements and there's a lot of dissimilar elements. So as I mentioned, the program still requires some sort of proposal package, very similar to what a business would put together for a venture capitalist. And there has to be a little bit of technical writing, there's a budget, they must solve a technical challenge. Those are all things that are across the board for every agency. But as I mentioned, agencies are different. Because remember, the previous slide showed, all these different agencies have a different focus for their research. Department of Transportation looks totally at transportation issues. Department of Homeland Security looks at infrastructure protection, border security, port security, things like that. So knowing again what that different agency focuses on lets you know what kind of ideas they're going to be interested in. And that funding level does change. So whether they're a grant versus a contract, whether their phase 1 awards anywhere between 100K to 250K, or anywhere between 300K and 1.5 mil for a phase 2. Actually, what goes into those proposals, typically these are about a 15 to 20 page technical volume. But there's a lot of really great guidance out there on the information that goes into there. So just like there's a lot of organizations that have entire walkthroughs on how to put together a pitch deck for venture capitalists, there are organizations that have entire walkthroughs on how to pull one of these together. Because again, there is although it requires some sort of work, it's really an investment of time and energy by the business on, I want to see this through. I want to make sure that I'm doing everything I need to get this funding. And so a lot of the agencies use that as kind of that culling mechanism. If you can't follow directions, you can't, look at the proposal requirements, the content that's supposed to go into it, and you just submit like a wrong assignment, like any of the, back in school days, if the teacher gave you the grading rubric and to get an A, you had to do A, B, and C, and you did D, E, and F, well, there's no wonder you got an F. You don't follow directions. So that's really kind of that first verification point that agencies use is, can these people follow directions? If they can't follow simple directions, I'm not going to put $100,000 into their business to grow. So agencies really want kind of that technical challenge focus. What is different? What needs to change? If somebody can go out there and already buy a product, it's going to be hard to convince them that there's something novel. So it is that, what is the innovative part of this? What's unique about it? Why is it doing something that nobody else is doing? But it also is a really great kind of business setup. Solving a technical challenge allows the business to look at the other issues going on. Can they make the product better by doing something different? Can they cut costs by doing something different? Can they actually look at their supply chain, and can they set it up so that other people can set up their supply chains the same way? This really does speak to that. Is this innovative? Is it worthy? And can I actually grow? Can I do different things? Can I make more products? This is why the programs are also a really great way just for a business to look at its operations. Is there something I can do differently? Is there something I can do that's unique? Is there something I can do that changes the way that other people are doing business? Because then it gives them that competitive edge too. It allows them to grow and capture better market opportunities. So you'll see a lot of kind of familiar faces up here with these SBIR-funded companies. All of these companies, some of them that hire, tens of 20,000 people now, got started through the SBIR program. So they got started by this simple federal funding mechanism. And now, some of these are global, international companies that, produce anywhere between $100 and $300 million in revenue each year. But they all started small. They all started with a different idea. They all started with an idea of how to do something unique. And they used the SBIR program to get that going. A great example here is actually iRobot. So the little robotic vacuum cleaner that a lot of people have that bumps into everything got started through SBIR funding. iRobot was awarded 30 DoD awards between 2001 and 2009 for over $10 million combined. iRobot now employs over 450 people on a national level, so they're not just in one area anymore. But that leads to the question, well, why was DoD interested in these little vacuum cleaners? Well, they weren't. iRobot didn't build the little robotic Roombas for DoD. They built EOD disposal robots. So robots that actually went out there and got rid of bombs out there in the field for warfighters. DoD had a need, iRobot had a solution, they talked to them, they built these, they sold these, and then they used the basic technology from this to come up with the Roomba. So that's how you transition during that phase 3 is you may not be selling, or they may not be selling that product to somebody, that exact thing, but there's stuff that they had to do, there's stuff they had to create, and there was stuff they had to, innovate on that leads to a better product for the commercial market. I'm not going to go out there and buy an EOD disposal or a EOD robot, but because I just don't need one. I don't know if anybody that's going to bomb me in Las Cruces, but I might buy a robotic vacuum cleaner. So they captured a new commercial market and a new opportunity to sell product and to grow by changing the stuff they were working on. Some really great examples quickly here, just from USDA. So USDA, one of the program managers, Scott Dockham, always holds these couple companies up as clarion calls. So Cowpots is a SBIR-funded company from USDA. It was a dairy farmer who was spending so much money getting rid of the manure from his cows that he was actually starting to lose money. So he looked at that and he said, well, what else can I do from this? He created plantable pots out of manure that you can actually use as starter pots. So people start their plants in these, they get them going, get them fertilized, then they bury the entire pot, and it uses the manure from the pot to actually fertilize itself to provide nutrients to the plant. I don't have the numbers on how many people Cowpots employs now, but this just shows that some of the most basic things that are out there, if you think about it in a new way, somebody's interested in putting money into these companies and these ideas. Another really great example here, and one that I kind of talked about earlier, is Stony Creek Colors. So Stony Creek Colors was a manufacturer, or not even a manufacturer, it was a small scale kind of weaver that looked at the indigo dyes that were out there and saw that all the indigo that goes into pretty much every denim, how you get denim blue, they're using harsh chemicals that can actually impact the consumer's health, like if the chemicals start bleeding and get into your bloodstream, or the dyer's health. So the people that were actually dyeing the denim were becoming sick because the chemicals were so toxic. So they came up with a bio-based indigo dye. And they actually submitted this to USDA. USDA funded them to grow a biologically based plant to produce an indigo dye that would actually replace the traditional way that we dye denim. But Stony Creek wasn't satisfied there. They got a phase 1 and a phase 2 for the indigo. Then they went back and they got a phase 1 and a phase 2 for brown. So a biologically based brown dye, they actually got funding for it. But they didn't stop there. Then they went back and got phase 1 and phase 2 funding for their supply chain. So now they have a supply chain that they don't grow the products themselves. They actually have farmers that grow them for them. Then they sustainably harvest them. They actually ship them off to the manufacturing plant. They process them. They create their non-toxic, well, it's still a chemical, but non-toxic chemical-based dye. And then they actually ship that out to brands like Lee, Guess, Lucky Jeans, who have all started product lines based on Stony Creek Colors. They got funding just for that. And then here's another great one here, Ecovative. So Ecovative took agricultural waste and they injected it with a fungal mycelium to grow materials that are used for packaging. So these are all natural package materials that are essentially mushrooms that were grown, and they were funded by USDA just to do that. So I wanted to also give some stats, because we talked a lot about what these programs theoretically do, but what do these programs actually do? So here's some SBIR funding that went directly to rural New Mexico. Mid-School Math is a company out in Taos. They're actually a fairly new company. They've gotten 6 SBIR awards over the past 3 years, all from Department of Education. And they've received over $3 million in funding to actually make interactive math lessons for middle schools. JT McGraw and Associates is out of Placitas. They've had 5 SBIR awards over the past 6 years for a total of $1.8 million in funding. They've done a lot of DoD work, so a lot of engineering for Department of Defense and a little bit for NASA. The SynSpecs is actually a really great one too. They originally started in Corrales. They had 6 SBIR awards awards for $1.3 million in funding. That allowed them to actually grow, and kind of sad note, they moved to Albuquerque, but they now have offices in California and Florida as well because they have become such a large company based on the work they did during their SBIR awards. And these are just a couple other companies here, but it shows that although this isn't the sum total of the rural awards, there's a lot of rural companies that aren't making use of this product and aren't making use of this program, that are missing the boat because they can grow huge. I see the note there, John, and yeah, I will definitely connect with you later on today, or call and leave you a message. But this just shows that even for a rural company, it doesn't have to be somebody in Albuquerque. It doesn't have to be somebody big. It doesn't have to be somebody that's already working on stuff and out there and, you know, is a success in and of their own right. This program can actually grow these small companies that are out there that feel like they're adrift by themselves because they can't find the opportunities that they need to help their areas. Well, these programs provide that. So real quickly, now that we've gone through all that, so why does this matter? Well, the NMFAST program is what I represent. We are part of New Mexico State University. We're actually out of the Arrowhead Center. And we are funded by the Small Business Administration to help small businesses across New Mexico go after these funding programs, to actually capture some of these federal dollars so that they can grow. They can become big companies, they can become big players, they can actually sell their products. All of our services are free for small businesses based in New Mexico. If the business isn't in New Mexico, we can probably match them with one of the other service providers, because there are 24 awardees across the country for the FAST program. And we pretty much do everything stem to stern. If somebody has an idea, we'll sit down and we'll talk with them about their idea, about what they're working on, about whether the SBIR program is right for them. We provide proposal development assistance. So I talked about the fact that they're still going to have to come up with that 15 to 20 page proposal to pitch to that government agency. But we have a lot of tools, we have a lot of resources, we have a lot of templates, we provide a lot of guidance. The only thing we don't do is actually write the proposals for them because we just can't. We don't know the idea as well as the business can, and we would be speaking out of turn and from a third person at that point. We do offer what we call micro grants, so we have a sliding scale of up to $2,000 that we can award to small businesses to help them put together their proposal package, to look at budgetary needs, to have them work with an accountant on what budget do they need to perform their phase 1 work. We hold free workshops throughout the state, and all of our resources are readily available. So we have an entire kind of service matrix that we can provide to any business that is interested in these type of opportunities. That includes monthly newsletters, video podcasts. We have a lot of videos online where people can learn more about the program, they can learn about the different agencies, they can learn about what they need to do to start working in this area. And again, we have a lot of different tools, resources, templates, things that make it a lot easier for people to actually put together what they're working on and what they want to do, how they capture some of this available funding. So that actually pretty much wraps up what we wanted to talk about here, but really just in summary, we exist to help small businesses grow. So if there's any business that you're working with that kind of needs to take that next step, is confused about where they're going, confused about what they need to do, and if they're working on something that is actually unique, we would be more than happy to talk to them about how these federal programs can help them grow and how can get dollars into their business as well as dollars into their community. So at this point, we're open to any questions. Wanted to throw out there one last piece of information. Yearly, the Small Business Administration does what they call the road show or the road tour, where they take federal program managers out to a lot of times underserved communities or underserved states. This year they decided to stop in Albuquerque. It's going to be August 14th. If anybody needs more information about the program, if anybody wants to talk with an actual funder about their idea and whether it's a fit for funding, the road tour is a really great thing to go to. They can get that opportunity to sit down one-on-one with a federal program manager and talk about what they're working on. I believe the registration is only $45 for the day, but there will actually be panels that talk about businesses like theirs that have grown, that have used SBIR funding to actually become players in the game now, that are actually out there selling products just because of what they worked on, because of their idea, and because they saw a need, they saw a fit, and they use these funding vehicles to do that. So when I send out the slides later to all of you, I'll make sure to have all of this information in there. I'll also attach the flyer. If there's anybody that you're working with that think that they might be interested more in the SBIR program, feel free to share the flyer with them. But thank you for joining us today. And now I'll open it up to anyone that has questions. If you want some more information, I would be more than happy to talk more with you offline if you wanted to have a longer conversation about some of the companies you're working with and whether this program is great for them. But at the moment, are there any questions by anyone? Alrighty, well, if there are no questions, again, I want to thank all of y'all for joining us.